Welcome to Crash Concepts, where the economy, energy, and the environment are explored. Up next, fresh ideas and insights into the factors that are driving the world and shaping your future. Presenting information you can't afford to live without, here's Chris Martenson.
Welcome to this Peak Prosperity Podcast. I am your host, Chris Martenson, and it is December 20th, 2017. Yes, it's that time of the year again. With the shortest days up here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's time to once again bring you the keenest insights to brighten your life. Hey, in order to assess where we're headed, what could be better than a gigantic romp through where we've just been? Continuing with our annual tradition, we're bringing you the best year-end review in the business, thanks to today's guest, Dave Collum. For those of you unfamiliar with Dave, he is a professor of chemistry and chemical biology at Cornell University. But in addition to his academic interests, Dave authors an annual macroeconomic assessment. Hey, it's broader than that. We're going to go geopolitical. We're going to talk political correctness, you name it. It's titled The Year in Review, hands down, the best synopsis of anything that mattered or happened in the previous 12 months. Also, the longest. We're going to hit a few highlights here in this podcast, but you're going to need a few mornings and several more cups of coffee than that to take in the magnificent collection of information Dave has lovingly assembled for you. It's broken into two parts. Part one covers economic and geopolitical topics, while part two covers everything else, including natural disasters, politics, political correctness, the media, scandals. But hey, I think I just repeated myself there. Dave's latest year in review can once again be found in full and all its glory on peakprosperity.com. I'm excited to have him with us now live in order to expand on his excellent insights. Dave, thanks for joining us again this year.
Hey, thanks for inviting me back. I appreciate you publishing it and then doing this podcast, which is kind of fun for me to wrap up what I just wrapped up.
Well, I want to talk about that in the process of that. First, thank you for taking the time to put pen to paper or finger to keyboard and delivering your yearly review. Let me tell you something that happens for me, and I want to see if this happens for you. So let's say I just wrote this big piece on oil, shale oil in particular. I gather all the data and I go, oh my God, how can it be this obvious that this thing's a giant swindle? And every time I write a collection of data like this, I scare myself a little bit. And I also wonder at how other people aren't seeing it this way. What happens for you as you romp through 10 times as much subject matter as I do in your yearly review all at once? Is that overload, or how do you manage that?
Well, yeah, it's actually tremendous overload. So what I do during the year, I've actually thought about writing this process. I once read that William F. Buckley could write a rough draft of a book in 160 hours.
Wow.
Did the math. I'm not that far off of a rough draft of something the size of a book, but so as I go through the year, any graphic I see, I throw in a folder. I keep open Word files on my different computers. I just copy paste quotes and excerpts and links and snotty words and things like that, and no attempt to cull it, no attempt to organize it. And then in October in the evenings, I start sorting through the notes and I rediscover what happened that year, because there's just things that seem so long ago. And then I start formulating categories. I start calling them, and that takes the evenings of October to do pretty much. And then I start banging out rough drafts of the different chapters, and they're essentially unedited. So I end up with just huge volume of poorly written, unedited, ungraphically supported, unfunny prose, which has been filled with human folly that at times is so wretched that it's almost unimaginable. And I literally find myself in kind of a deep funk. And then what happens is from there, I start editing it and start adding graphics and start making it smooth it over. And then it kind of pulls me out. But by the time I'm done, I say, that's not so bad. And then it reminds me, I keep asking myself, why do I do it? And the major reason, besides narcissism and things like that, are that it kind of pulls it together. These things I'd totally forgotten about. It's like a final exam for a course. It kind of anneals the whole thing into a storyline, and that way I retain it. I'm able to grasp what that year meant to me.
Well, So this it is difficult though to sort of catalog a whole year of craziness because look, our view at Peak Prosperity is we're not just in a bubble, we're in the mother of all bubbles. That this is a very long tail end and of a very bad set of ideas implemented to absurd levels. And to really catalog that, first, I think I advise everybody keep a journal. I think that's what you've done because these are amazing times. I truly believe in 20 years or 10 or 50, whatever, people look back on your collection here and say, what the hell were those people thinking? How could they have fallen for such a thing? It's like we chuckle at those tulip bulb people, right? But those delusions occur and recur, and it's part of the human condition. So here we are at the height of these follies. You mentioned, you sort of hinted at it, though. It can be a little depressing, though, to sort of add up the entire pile of stupidity all at once, can't it?
Yeah, and the other thing you talked about, the gigantic bubble, which sure we're going to get to, but my worldview now has gotten sufficiently dire, as has yours, that I'll read some article about some guy predicting a 25% correction. If we get a 25% correction, I'm dead wrong, right? 25% won't correct anything. We are way out of balance relative to that, and I've told people that. I said, if we don't see a 50% correction in equities and bonds and things like that, I will simply have analyzed it wrong because those are just regressions to the mean, in my opinion. So yeah, it's a tough process. What makes it really tricky is that at this period we're in now, what I call end of cycle. Now, no one knows when it's going to end, but it sure as heck isn't the beginning of a cycle, that we know. The reckless investing behavior, reckless personal behavior, reckless borrowing, all looks okay. And so someone's out there ringing some bell saying the end is near, and they just seem stupid. And so I actually started writing these things when things really were pretty bleak. So I didn't sound stupid. I'd made a fortune off gold, so I could kind of hide behind that. Now I'm just a cranky old man, running around ranting in the subway, right? But
yeah. Well, I too am that cranky old man. So I want to sort of see if we can parse this from the outside in, and I want to start with this idea of broken markets. And I've long been on that bandwagon for reasons ranging from the swarm of computer algos that infest the market structure to warped psychology as the central bankers have printed us so deep into a house of mirrors, there's probably no way really ever to find our way back out. And you wrote this, quote, regression to the mean is a force of nature. It's also a mathematical truism that markets reside below the mean for half of their price-weighted existence. The failure to go through the mean in 2009 is an anomaly caused by global central bankers that remains as an IOU on investors' balance sheets and foreshadows trouble to come. Expand on that for us, would you? Help people understand, why going through the mean is a pretty normal thing, and what central bankers did by forestalling that.
Well, that there's this concept of zombie companies and zombie debt, and one of the arguments why you have to have recessions is it's kind of a purge. It's a projectile vomit when you get sick or when you get food poisoning. And if you could somehow, well, here's one, Nobel Prize should be given out for Imodium, right? When I have an intestinal problem, I don't take Imodium right away. And that's because Mother Nature's trying to tell me something, right? So I let things purge, and they basically came in with a bolus of money that was so unimaginably large that they stemmed the problem before the problem had finished doing its work. And so companies that really were not viable, except for the fact that they were living on credit, got saved. And these things represent parasites. These are like intestinal worms. Sorry to go into the intestines so deeply today. And the purging, Andrew Mellon said it, liquidate, I think was the phrase, something along those lines in the 30s. You got to get rid of the rot. And the fires in California are getting rid of the rot, unfortunately. And when you let the rot get too bad, then you end up with regression through the mean, right? You're not clearing out rot when you burn down a neighborhood now, but you're clearing out underbrush when you burn the scrub. And so when you let a system get way far away from equilibrium, the return trip is so dangerous and so destructive. And we're going to get one of those in a very big way, I think, because we got a lot of regressing to do.
I will put a very sizable amount of money down on this wager that we were tipping over in 2011. We were tipping over again in 2014. We did it again in early 2016. And each of those times we had these and 2 times in 2016, by the way, once in January with a miracle rescue towards the end of that. And then again after the election at 2:30 in the morning that Wednesday, when miraculously investors suddenly parsed everything known about Trump and magically cast that into a 1,000-point Dow futures rebound before market open. That these will all be revealed eventually as times when the central bankers panicked and threw more money into the markets in an attempt to rescue them because they're so afraid of the downside. And my hypothesis here, David, is that people are very inappropriately overlooking the fact that the central bankers are actually scared, meaning they don't know what to do. They don't like what they've created. They don't have a good plan for what to do with it besides more of the same. But every time they do a little more of the same, we go a little further over the tips of our skis, and nobody seems to have a good plan out. I think people should be cautious in the face of that. Instead, people seem to be as bullish as they've ever been. Do you agree with that? And how do we begin to account for that psychology here?
I totally agree with that. I think the Fed has realized that they're so far. I almost used the leaning over the skis metaphor this year. I don't think I did, but maybe I did. It gets so big, I can't remember. And I think the Fed is indeed truly terrified, and they're terrified because they know. Let's say we had so jumping ahead, maybe I don't know. The markets by any one of a dozen indicators are twofold overvalued, meaning a regression to the mean is 50%, a regression through the mean in a sort of a Hussman-esque sort of way is 60, 70, 80, whatever number you want as you start doing real destructive things. But if you have a regression to the mean, which ought to be benign, right? You're just giving up excess. But all the pension funds in the world will break, all the people's savings, all the boomers, everything will break. And so we've now built a system that requires this complete house of cards not fall. And it's not possible, in my opinion. So they're trying to hold it up. They build these Potemkin village type models to pretend like everything's fine. They lie about the price earnings ratios on indices. They're way off. Like the Russell 2000 reports at PE of 25, and people say, well, it's a growth index, therefore 25 is fine. You find out it's more like 90.
90? How do we get to 90?
You get to 9. You wouldn't believe the fraud they commit. So the way they calculate a PE is they take all the companies, they look at their individual price earnings ratios, and they say any company over 40, they round down to 40. And any company that has no earnings or negative earnings, they round it up to 40. And so they're completely fabricating. So this guy named Steve Bregman actually calculated by taking all the earnings and losses and all the market cap and just big one gigantic PE. Comes out to 87 for the triple Qs. And I think it was John Crudell said that the Russell was about the same. So you're buying something that's a 1% return investment. And you think you're buying it at 4 to 5%. So it's kind of fraud.
Kind of fraud. Well, let's talk about sort of fraud that's completely it's just a swindle as far as I'm concerned. I love this example you gave. Starting simple, you wrote McDonald's. So this is a fast food company, everybody. They sell hamburgers. Saw zero revenue growth between 2008 and 2016. So that would be zero, but had 154% growth in debt. You left this out, but they now have negative book value. They used to have a positive book value. Now it's negative because of all that debt. Its share price, though, is up more than 200%. And I love this. This is not an outlier. This, to me, that's just, again, this is fractals sort of discussion. If you can understand the McDonald's story, you can understand the larger story because you're going to see it over and over again. Just how do we begin unpacking this insanity here?
Well, actually, that insanity, the guy who did a beautiful job of this, named Mike Leibowitz, and he unpacked that story for something like 20 companies. So in the year in review is a Leibowitz created chart showing the revenue growth over, and that one might have been over the last 5 years, and the share price growth. Revenue growth over the last 5 years was minus 25%. And I know that if you're losing revenues, you're gonna lose money eventually, right? That's just kind of math. You can crank up that profit margin by firing people, but you're in trouble if your revenues are dropping. And then the share prices are up something like 105% over that period. So this is just this is a dark kind of stupid that's going on here, and yet the market's going up. It's I keep groping for a metaphor. It's like a 2-year-old on a sugar high, like stumbling around the living room, and banging its head against the table. And nothing can get this market's attention. It just keeps doing its thing. And at some point, it'll get scolded by reality, and the thing will be in a puddle of tears. But then people say, "Oh, no one saw it coming." Yes, of course we saw it coming. Anyone could see it coming. Helen Keller could see it coming.
Well, this time is different, Dave, and that's what we're really being led to believe. It is different. Here's what I think is different, and this is something I have to have a little caution around, is that these markets are now dominated by computers, right? Even at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, there's no more people running around in blue and gold jackets, right? It's just blinking lights on a server farm. And these algorithms, talking with people who actually run and code high-frequency trading algorithms, that these things are very actually simple. Like if they're out of parameter, they shut down. But if they see something going the direction they want to go, they'll chase it. And on the basis of that, I was highly suspicious that Ben Bernanke, just optically, this was really poor, but one of the first plum, reward positions he took exiting the chairmanship of the Federal Reserve was with Citadel, which said he's going to perform the chief economist function. This is a company that goes home flat every night. What do they need an economist for, right? And it's the largest octopus high frequency trading firm out there. It seems like we're in an era of nothing matters, nobody cares. Like I'm sure we'll get to this in the politics section, but watching how these political witch hunt investigations are conducted and what is prosecuted and what isn't, it's all just a mess, right? But optically, what did you make of Bernanke, who had, to quote his own book, the courage to act? What do you make of that move of his?
Well, it's just a revolving door. I'm going to give Bernanke a little more credit. I don't think Bernanke came up with that title. I actually think Bernanke might have some humility. I'm not sure. But I don't think anyone would title their own book The Courage to Act. I think that got jammed down his throat by the publishers. But with that said, his claim that he had 100% confidence that he could control inflation, that's baloney. Going to Citadel is clearly some sort of I don't even know who writes his paycheck, but why would Citadel hire him? Great question. Citadel's not only even at the end of the day, they're zigzagging through even on microsecond time scales, and so they don't need Bernanke, but it's a thank you very much from Wall Street, and instead of getting it from Goldman, where it'd be so garishly post-performance bribe, and he goes to Citadel, where you can't really find a conflict. Again, who ponied up to give Bernanke a salary? I don't know. For all I know, Jamie Dimon did.
Yeah, well, let's go back to the McDonald's example, because people are asking, why is this stock market so bulletproof? Stock buybacks by corporations are a major, if not the major, source of rocket fuel for the equity markets. I use that term loosely these days. corporations have been using debt to go on the largest debt-funded buying spree in all of history. We have so many records being broken right now. Here's one. So why is that such a bad thing? I mean, if a CFO can retire dividend yielding stock at 2% and borrow at 1%, isn't that just a great thing?
Well, it's when it started, it was okay. The idea of a share buyback was an insider buying shares that he knew were undervalued, and so Peter Lynch put forth the notion that when the insiders are buying, whether it's the company buybacks or insiders buying, that there must be something good going on. They know more than we do. But then it became a pump and dump scheme, and it became a legal pump and dump scheme due to some legislation in the early 80s. And so here's what they're doing is they're taking on debt, and they're not topping off pension plans and things like that. And instead they're buying back shares. And so they're becoming more saddled with debt. They're decreasing the share count. And in the meantime, they're developing this liability. There's a terrible corporate pension plan liability. Now, I think it was last year, I actually talked about the idea that in the limit, you could take enough debt to buy back all the shares. And that's essentially a leveraged buyout, right? It's an LBO. And as you take on debt to buy back shares, increasingly the creditors own the company. And in the limit that they buy all the shares, the creditors own the entire company. So now here's the interesting question. Before that last share sells, what's the PE ratio on that last share? So you have a price of the share, and it's not worth shit because it's the creditors own the company. You don't know. It's not like that one share now owns the whole company. The creditors own the company. And so literally the earnings of the company might be billions. There's one share. And so the PE ratio should be 1 over 10 to the 8th or 9th or 10th or whatever. Mm-hmm. So the PE ratio and the limit should go to 0. But what happens is people see the dropping PE and they go, oh, what a bargain. And then they don't even notice. Investors don't pay any attention to the balance sheets. I mean, some presumably do. But IBM spent $40 billion of credit buying back shares. Investors should be running from that company. They should be hightailing it out of there because that's a scam.
Well, speaking of a scam, I know. Listen, I happen to really like Amazon Prime. It's pretty. You couple of clicks and the big brown truck of happiness rolls up. I like it. Every time I look at the financials of Amazon, though, I just come away with the idea of scamazon. Because first they're opaque, but what I can derive from it is this is a company that's not earning any money. Really. In fact, it's taking loss leaders on all sorts of positions. It looks like it's using its web services, which is profitable, to subsidize its retail side, which is, to me, the very definition of antitrust. Do you think, would you agree that scamazon is more smoke and mirrors than reality? And is there a danger at some point that they go too far and they get the Ma Bell treatment, meaning the antitrust people finally wake up and say this is not right?
Yeah, and that's very dangerous. But here's the deal. Let's say they hold together. I don't know how to value them at this point, because if they hold together as a monstrous, let's call it a monopoly that's allowed to exist, then they might be worth what the market's pricing them at. Because it might be that once they have control, they can say, okay, now we're going to let our profit show up, because they're running profit neutral on purpose. I think they're literally just using the cash flow to just keep buying stuff up. And so it's like a land speculator. You can say the guy doesn't have a penny in the bank. You go, yeah, but he's got thousands of acres and buildings and whatever, right? So I'm not sure if they're valued at what they're, but now here's the interesting scenario. Their value is proportionate to some level to their monopolistic skill. And so to the extent that they can totally control the market, that adds a huge premium to their price. If they get broken up, that premium should be gutted, because now the pieces are non-monopolistic, non-profit bearing pieces, and without the power to keep mauling people. So that I think the breakup will unlock shareholder value in the negative sense.
Now, you use the word mall, M-A-U-L. I want to use M-A-L-L. One of the things that's been happening, of course, is we're just seeing retail apocalypse out there. All of the retail malls come in A, B, and C grades. The C grades are just getting destroyed, B even as well. Some of the A grades seem to be holding out for now. But what I'm noticing in that, Dave, is that I can't go a week without reading about some major bankruptcy or store shutterings. It's a retail apocalypse. So in my mind, and see, this is where the old guy in me comes out. I don't understand how the Bureau of Labor Statistics is reporting reliably that retail workers are just going up like a straight line ever since the so-called recovery started in 2009. And I keep reading about store closing. So I'm wondering, these stores must have been staffed with nothing, with no humans, I guess. Or there must be some secret place the BLS has found where people are going into retail that I'm not reading about. How do I make sense of this?
Yeah, I don't know how to make sense. The other thing is they're hiding the retail apocalypse behind the Amazon story, I think. So the claim is that, well, online's just trouncing brick and mortar.
Yeah.
And so it's a culture change, a sea change, but everything otherwise is fine. Now, you and I both know that if in the labor capital balance, if all of a sudden labor can't be paid, you're going to have a problem. But I also think the problem is that it's a mirage that it's online destroying the brick and mortar, because the claim is that online is about 8.5% of the sales. So if brick and mortar's closing, I don't know, I saw some numbers of like 8,000 stores. If they're closing thousands and thousands of stores, and Amazon and the various onliners are only 8%. Then those two don't square. So I actually think we have a retail apocalypse. If you sum over both online and brick and mortar, we have a retail apocalypse. And I don't know where it goes from here. At some point, there's going to be a spark that lights the fuse that blows this whole thing up. And you and I both wonder when, and we can't say, but the house of cards will get a vibration and down it goes.
Well, I think it's been forestalled for obvious reasons, because in my view, this is truly the mother of all bubbles. We aren't experiencing an echo bubble of an echo bubble, which would have been an internet bubble being followed by a housing bubble, being followed by this mess. What we're really experiencing, in my view, began in the late 1970s. It's a fantasy bubble sitting on one delusion, and it's that one can forever compound one's debts at twice the rate of one's underlying income. So when we look from the late 70s to now, debt's been compounding about almost 9% a year. Even nominal GDP, let alone real GDP, are way under that number. So that delusion, Dave, is so deeply embedded in the entire structure of money, power, geopolitical arrangements that nobody in the echo chamber has any idea what I'm talking about when I raise this. It's just like it's like I'm talking words they can't make sense of, right? So they can't detect it, let alone fashion a coherent response to it. So here we are, this thing, at some point blows up under its own, power. Do you agree with that sort of larger assessment? And in your view, what happens when 50 years of self-deception coagulates in the monetary aorta?
Yeah, I do agree. If you look at the various numbers about how many assets boomers have, boomers are heading for retirement. They can declare that they're going to work for eternity, but the next aneurysm will put a check on that, and the next layoff will put a check on that. And so I once read somewhere something like 50% of the people who retire do so against their will. And so you got these boomers, and you see numbers all over the ballpark, but what's clear is they're way, way, way undersaved. And the savings don't even include cancellation due to mortgage debt, and some of them even, student loan debt and credit card debt. And so I saw some stat about something like the median boomer who makes $250 a year has $450 a year saved. And my brain explodes at that. That person's been living such a good life, and they cannot retire. They don't know how to live on that amount of money. $450,000. at current returns, it's going to spin off, 4-digit incomes per year. It's just not going to pay anything. So I can't imagine the sense of horror and frustration. The person who's my age is looking up and saying, wow, I don't know how I'm going to live the next 30 years.
Well, maybe healthcare insurance premiums will go down in the future.
Yeah.
Free up some cash.
Maybe. Seems unlikely, doesn't it? But I even find the tentacle stuck to me, right? So I subscribe to some things that I read, like Grant's Interest Rate Observer, and we get a person to clean our house once a week, and we got internet, we've got phones. I have a phone system, a landline, because I've got a security system that goes through it. And then you got the cell phones, and if you look at all the tentacles hanging off me, I look and I go, wow, the fixed cost before I even eat a meal is just enormous. Now, I don't have a mortgage, but I look at my taxes and they're just humongous. So my annual budget before I do anything remotely discretionary is well above what a Social Security would pay out. And I've thought a lot about it. But
yeah, no, it's astonishing. Just one town south of me is Amherst, Massachusetts, college town. So unfortunately for the town, its tax base is largely wrapped up in a 501c3 corporation entity. And so they have to get all of their taxes from the homeowners and, a lot of college professors and students and all that stuff. But if you look down there, it's not at all uncommon, Dave, to see a pretty standard house with taxes of 10 or 11, or I'll make this simple, $12,000 a year. Property taxes, which means that your first $1,000 a month is going to rent your house from the town. And that's what are you going to do? Your choices include either paying that or losing your home. So there's really not a lot of ways to exit the system at this point, and once you factor in all those other structural things, that if you say, well, I need to eat, I need to have car, which means I need to have car insurance. I'm going to have fire insurance on my house as well. I'm going to have health care insurance. You add that up and you are way past the median household income in the county I live in, because I happen to live in one of the poorer counties in Massachusetts. But I just look at that and I don't even for the life of me understand how it operates until I wander over to consumer credit data. I'm like, oh, this is the game. The game is we ratchet the costs up right to the point where people can barely stand it and then allow them to borrow the rest so they can make up the difference. It feels like a feudal serf system that's a little bit more subtle, or a parasitic system. But, first, is there another way? Am I missing something in the land of the free, home of the brave, that I should be seeing this differently? Or, does this help us understand the growing unrest and unhappiness we're starting to see socially?
That's the whole story, actually. I mean, you really have to be so self-delusional to not see this problem. And so, yeah, I think you're dead right. I think consumers are now starting to try to find ways to resist taking out more debt, but now they're taking out debt to keep the lights on, right? And then you got idiots out there, who talk about how it's good that consumers are taking equity out of their house. And, no, it's not. It means they're desperate. That's just a pure desperation. Consumers aren't taking equity out of their house like it's some investment. That's not. You end up owing more money on the same house. What good does that do you, right? But they got to pay bills. I'm horrified at what it must be like trying to raise a family and trying to retire on the amount of resources that not only the average, but anyone in the bottom 90% has. I don't know how they're going to do it.
Well, and in the next generation, my eldest daughter, 23 years old, her and a lot of her friends are eschewing that whole model and choosing not to either go into debt, choosing in some cases not to go to college, choosing not to have cars, choosing not to buy houses, all of that stuff. I really think that in this model, if you give people no way to participate in a system and no hope that they could do it without it being thieved away from them at some point, guess what? You find people don't participate. I'm astonished, David, all the hand wringing from the people like, why aren't these millennials behaving properly? It's like, well, when you demoralize somebody completely and leave them no way to participate meaningfully, try and act surprised when they don't actually show up all excited for that gig. It's just, I don't know. It really feels like, I think Jim Kunstler puts it best. We're running rackets on ourselves, and there's only so long you can run rackets before people get tired of that carny show. Like, no, I'm not, I'm not going to try and do the ring toss. It's a rigged game. Sorry.
Question is, what is it going to let's say that it does so systematically and it doesn't go rogue warrior, right? I mean, there's always risk of a phase change, and the whole thing just goes bananas. We end up with guillotines and everything else, things Edmund Burke worried about. But let's just say we just correct for it systematically. What does it look like? I don't even know how to wrap my brain around the idea that some doctor who earned $180,000 a year and then retires and then doesn't have any money. I don't know what that looks like when society's loaded down with those people.
Well, I do, because I spent a month in Buenos Aires this year in June, all of June, and formerly middle-class people, very proud people down there. Not one person approached me and asked for money, not the whole time I was there, with a lot of poverty going on. And I saw formerly middle-class people tipping into the dumpsters after dark because their pride was involved. They didn't want to be seen doing it. And that's just, I think that's what a slow burn looks like. Formerly proud, wealthy people just get systematically eroded, and then you wake up one day and it's your feet upside down tipping out of the dumpster. I think that's what it looks like, and we're well on our way there. And, we're starting to, as you say, we're late in the cycle, and you wrote that you think the next recession starts unnoticeably, and, the economists miss every single one of them. But even a typical recession, if it comes forward now, is going to be highly damaging to portfolios for sure, to jobs, absolutely, to corporate balance sheets, which will finally be recognized as, oh, yeah, they count, all of that stuff. And we know we're fighting this with everything we've got monetarily. But isn't this, Dave, really a fight between what we might call reality and fantasy? You can't print your way to prosperity, or I'm open to the idea that maybe this time is different. Although I have to confess, I'm not that open.
Well, you mentioned a typical recession. If a typical recession caused that much pain, it won't be a typical recession either, right?
Right.
So my model going forward is I think the next recession is going to be a real butt kicker. And that's why the Fed's so terrified. I think they realize that it's going to feed on itself, and you're going to end up with the vicious cycle kicking into gear. And the Fed's not going to be able to control it, because one of the things they showed even the last time, they can stem the decline in the markets, but they can't do much for the economy. Again, I don't know where I got it from. I could probably look it up, but someone tallied the annual GDP growth from 1930 to 1939. And then they tallied the GDP growth from 2007 to 2016. And they're identical annualized. So we have been tracking the Great Depression in terms of GDP growth. So you can be all thrilled about the fact that your 401k has appreciated, but it's on a pocket of air because nothing is improved underneath the surface. So I came up with this maxim that I put in there, that I think is original, but it's a pirate from a related maxim, and that is I wrote that overvaluation is appreciation pulled forward, and undervaluation is appreciation deferred. That's the pirate of the savings maxim, right? You recognize that. But why it helps me is I realize that once you're 2x overvalued, no matter how many more gains you get, you're just pulling from the future. And you're going to give them all back. And it's either going to be given back by price or by time or a combination of the two. But you're going to regress to the mean. You can pretend like you're not going to, but that's like pretending you're never going to die. It's simply not true. We will regress to and through the mean at some point. And when you're 2x overvalued, that means it's going to take either 30 years, like in the Nikkei, or massive price adjustments. neither one appeals to me.
Well, I'm with you on that. And of course, in my framework, I see that everything we talk about in terms of prices, what are bonds worth, what are stocks worth, well, they're nothing. They're claims. They're worth whatever the underlying entities can produce. Wait, when we peel that back, we discover that involves real raw goods being transformed into real products with real value added. That's ultimately driving all of this. So now we're really at a resource story, and everything I do, I just wrote a big two-part report on oil, and most people don't know this because it didn't get splashed around, but much. But the most important piece of data I know about is that the Beijing Petroleum University, that's their premier place where they train their petroleum engineers, came forward with a 3-year study. They looked at everything and they said, oh, China hits a peak of oil in 2018 from both conventional and unconventional sources. Our own shale plays aren't going to work out because we have more of a molested geology. This all fractured. It's more like the Bakersfield. It doesn't really work for that. So they don't have much, and they're going to be doubling their imports of oil over the next 12 years out to 2030. And where's that going to come from? And they had some serious questions about that. And so this begins to allow us to understand what's happening in Saudi Arabia, pivoting away from the U.S. towards China, with Russia building pipelines rapidly. This is all happening. And meanwhile, in the United States, we're telling ourselves a story that says, oh, we're going to solve this with cleverness. We're drilling into the source rocks themselves. This is almost like we're going to be the new Saudi America. It's such an amazing self-delusion. Here's the thing. These shale companies, Dave, have not made net positive free cash flows in any year of their existence collectively. Not in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, clear on through. Not when oil was 100 a barrel, 120, not when it was 80, not when it was 20, at no point. So if you said, hey, give me a company where their principal thing is a well they drill for many millions of dollars, it depletes principally 85% within 3 years. How many years of operation would you need to see before you'd want to see that enterprise kicking out positive free cash flows? I'm like, no more than 3, Right. And the truth is, we're 10 years into that experiment without a single year of positive free cash flows. And I don't know what it's going to take to wake people up, but you've heard it here. There's at least $300 billion of debt on the line and about that much equity on the line. This is about a $500 billion accident waiting to hit somebody's portfolio. Try to act surprised when it doesn't show up in Wall Street's portfolio, but I'll just pick a victim. Maybe Orange County, California. I don't know. Just because they are Charlie trying to kick the football in this story, are they not?
Yeah. It's the whole story is just mind-boggling, and the willful delusion, and I don't know who gets it and who's just lying. I don't know if Wall Street's just saying, look, we're gonna, you have to keep dancing, as the CEO of Citigroup said at one point. And it baffles me. It baffles me that somehow, I guess everyone thinks they're smart enough they're going to get out before reality encroaches. And that's not possible, right? By definition, someone has to own those assets all the way back to the bottom.
I saw you collected a lot of quotes, and most of the sort of the realistic quotes or / bearish quotes really seem to be coming from old guys, right? So you got your tutors and your singers and all those people. So did you notice that the people with more market experience were tending to be had more warnings? The Dalios and et al. And I know you made a point there at one point that of the people who are many of the participants in the market are not old enough to even remember 2008 from a market standpoint. So is this just like, are there just people who don't get it? This is a new world. It's a brave new world.
I think it's always this way. I think Wall Street, the fuel of Wall Street is a bunch of crazed kids. And the old guys are looking in, and it reminds me when your kid is walking across the living room stumbling at the age of 2, and the kid's about to do a header, and you're looking, oh, that's going to hurt. And at some point you just watch them do the header, and then you sort of they end up in tears, and you say, oh, you'll be okay. And the old guys are just watching this amused at some level and horrified at another. I keep hearing stories from behind closed doors of people who are just horrified at what they have to do to manage money and how they they just suck it up and take the risk, but they think it's just going to be awful.
Well, you wrote prudence disappoints investors in the final stages of a market cycle. We work with financial advisors who say that the career risk is extraordinary to try and be prudent at this point in time. Nobody wants prudence. It's too hard. It's too hard.
Yeah.
So,
Another guy will make better returns than you and get all the money.
Yep. So, yeah, prudence disappoints investors in the final stages of a market cycle. I don't even know if this counts as a cycle, though. This is really the mother of all bubbles. This is astonishing. Really, keep the journal, because this has never been the central bankers are not monetary wizards. They're basically inept social experimenters. Then, they don't know what they're doing. When you take the price of money and you make it negative for the first time in like money's history, that's really a social experiment more than anything else, isn't it?
Yeah, it's again, mind-boggling. This Swiss central bank creates money and then buys equities. If I could do that, I'd do it.
Yeah,
right? That's a good business. But the world stands by, and a friend of mine said, well, but their currency's too strong, and that's what they're doing. And I'm going, there's just something wrong with a system where counterfeiting money and buying assets is constructive, right? That person should be punished. That person, the free market should have a way of dealing with that kind of behavior. Right now, you can't, and that's why I think it'll end in tears.
Yeah.
And you get these little things that look uncorrelated, but they are, like, Bitcoin. And you get all these, Bitcoins. Bitcoin is going to be historic no matter what the outcome is. And I've been thinking about that a lot. I, of course, own zero and will not own any until it becomes a real currency. And that's going to take unbelievable heroic change in its behavior. But it's going to be historic, because if you think about the possibility, let's say Bitcoin does become real. It's not just a speculative play toy. It is a transformational thing. It means that we have transferred wealth from adults who've worked their whole lives over to 12-year-old kids who bought Bitcoin with their Christmas presents. and there's a guy at Target who made a ton of money on these speculative things. I think he was trading vol, but some kid whose parents, gave him a check for Christmas, and he bought Bitcoin, and he's worth something like $10 million. So here's a system that's transferred money into a teenager's pocket for reasons that are completely baffling. And so if Bitcoin becomes real, then the entire shift of who owns what's going to be profound. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be a bubble. I think it is a bubble. I think it's going to burst. And when it does, then it's going to be one of the truly gigantic bubbles, because not only because of its size, it's approaching $1 trillion, although I read something about it crashing today, but that's daily, right?
Yeah,
whatever. But it's upwards of $1 trillion, and if that goes to zero, it's going to be second at most to the tulips, and possibly exceed the tulips in terms of the absurdity of it. And what bothers me about this bubble of everything that you were talking about earlier, it's based on a storyline that stinks. So the bubble in 1929 was based on this idea that we were in this brave new world. We had just invented basically electrical appliances and cars and autos. 30 years earlier, people were running around in wagon carts and using brooms to clean their house. And now all of a sudden there's all this cool stuff and electric lights and everything. And so I can accept the 29 bubble, why people got sucked in. And then the .com bubble, people got sucked in because the internet had just shown its stuff, and everything was going wild. So I get that one. This one is based on the assumption that some central bank is just going to protect you. That's a pathetic story.
Yeah. Well, the thing about once Bitcoin gets unpacked, I get so I like the idea of a blockchain. I like the idea of distributed ledgers. I'm not smart enough to understand all the clever ways that will be implemented, but I am smart enough to know that people's fantasies about Bitcoin becoming the currency are completely delusional because of the way it's constructed. I know a lot of people, Dave, who've bought Bitcoin. I don't know any who can explain it to me, really. Very few, I should say. Not we've got a few at our site that are way more knowledgeable than I by far. But I mean, the average person I talk to who's sort of involved in it, and they're like, "Oh, this is going to be the new money. This is the way people are going to transact." I'm like, but every single transaction is understood throughout the entire system. It just doesn't scale, right? The bigger it gets, the computational power required doesn't go up linearly, right? It just becomes extraordinary. So it has some uses, but becoming the currency is not one of them, right?
So I keep hearing, and it could be ignorance on either my part or their part, I don't know which, that the average Bitcoin transaction requires the energy that a house consumes over 9 days or 2 weeks or something like that. Do you have any idea what that means? What is it about a transaction of Bitcoin that would be so energy intensive? If it was the mining of a Bitcoin, I would get it. Because they're algorithm driven mining procedures. So you could say, well, you got supercomputers whizzing away to mine these things. I get that. But I've heard it's the transactions, and I don't understand how something that's the click of a mouse can consume energy. Do you understand that?
I'm not sure I can do this justice, but let's say you and I decide to trade zero point 0.01 Bitcoin. So it goes from wallet A to wallet B. But that transaction can't be verified until all these other computers out there, in particular the miners, are going through to make sure they're running a very, very comprehensive algorithm. They have to do, basically they're running a cracking operation to make sure that they can verify that that's true. So each block of transactions goes through this chain, right? So every time we conduct a transaction, that has to run through the chain, right? It's got to be verified. And so there are so many computers. This is not a simple computational thing that has to be run. It's very, very large. It's a very comprehensive thing. And so that gives it lots the security.
Where are these computers? So what computers are we talking about?
Well, some people have set up actual, mining operations and whatnot, where they've got them, parked in a big room, wired up to a hydro dam. But in some cases, we've discovered that they need so much power that they've used slaves. They've slaved on computers, and there was recent Tesla discovered that somebody had been using their computational power to drive this business and or using their energy directly. Sometimes we discovered that cell phones have been hijacked for this. So that's some of the darker ways that this can happen.
So let me ask you a simple. So I order a pizza and I pay with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
9 days worth of energy consumed to order that pizza, supposedly.
Yeah.
Of a house's energy.
And it may take up to an hour for that transaction to actually be verified, right?
You can't even do it then.
So in that hour, the Bitcoin that you paid for your pizza, that pizza might have been worth twice as much or half as much. We don't know.
Also, the pizza's cold. Right? I mean, you got to be able to do it faster than that. But the question is, who paid for the energy?
Well, that would be, I guess, silently hidden in the electric bills of all the people participating in this. It's kind of
Therefore, Bitcoin transactions pick up speed. People are going to find their electric bills. They're going to get crushed. Their own computers are going to get buried by Bitcoin transactions, right?
Well, it's all sort of distributed through the thing. People have made the point that, cat videos on YouTube are burning way more electricity than that. But this is kind of the silent side of our so-called, Internet of Everything free world where, transactions happen quick. You do your Google search. It takes, 0.21 seconds to come up with a million results. There's a giant server somewhere that's consuming gobs of energy around that. So our internet is not free. It consumes some huge percentage of worldwide global electricity production. I forget what it is, but I'm going to make a number up. I think it's something like 8 or 9%. It's a lot. It's a very, very big number. It's huge. And Bitcoin's just tucked within that,
okay.
Somehow.
Okay.
Well, let's talk about something a little bit more real then, because gold. Gold, you wrote On a seemingly monthly basis, gold takes swan dives as somebody decides to sell several billion-dollar equivalents, that might be 20 or 30,000 future contracts, when the market is least liquid, that is thinly traded. Stories of fat-fingered trades abound, but I suspect these are just traders molesting the market for fun and profit, unconcerned that a regulator would ever call them on it. And then you note the silver market looking really creepy there, 17 days down in a row, where you need a ruler to understand that market best, because it's literally ruler straight 17 days in a row. To me, this looks like prima facie evidence of a manipulated market, meaning it's not legitimate price discovery, that somebody is molesting it for fun and profit, and regulators could not care less at this point in time. Fair?
Yeah, fair. So in some sense, embedded in that bundle of snark was that the statement endorsing the idea that the price was not necessarily manipulated by high-powered, sovereign states. One of the theses that gets batted about, and it could be true, I'm a big fan of conspiracy theory. One of the theories is that, the central banks want to keep prices down, and so they bash it. I don't think you need that thesis to explain those late night rates. I think you just need some 20-something-year-old kid who says, "Oh, look I can see the trading stack," I think it's called, and I can bash through all those trades and crush this thing with this many future trades. And so that person then goes and does it, and they run the stops, and then they trigger the sell off, and then they buy it at the bottom, and they do it all over again. But these are pretty big traders, so they're probably traders, London whale types, maybe something like that. Who knows?
Well, and they've gotten away with it for so long, and they know that nobody's going to come and regulate them or slap them on the wrist even. And by the way, I think we in last year's year in review, we went through all the things that bankers had been caught manipulating for fun and profit, and it was an extensive list. I just believe that if anything that humans can get away with without consequences, they'll do, and that can be really horrifying stuff too. I think the Harvey Weinstein piece just showed, oh yeah, if he can get away with it, he'll keep doing it, right? It's just part of the makeup. So banks have not gotten in trouble for anything. They got a couple of fines here and there, but I mean, come on, HSBC resizing their teller window so they can get special suitcases of cash from drug lords, and nobody gets charged with anything? Really? And
yeah,
by the way, just fun fact, most people don't know that the district attorney who was on that case was Loretta Lynch, who later went on to become the attorney general and displayed even better ethics in that position.
Yeah, she's a real piece of work. In fact, one of the things, what came out of Russiagate, if you can make sense out of Russiagate, you're a better man than I, but one of the things that came out of it is you try to piece together the story about Russian collusion and things like that, is how many people who you don't even know are connected. So you find out there's some Russian spy who's doing this with this guy, and then you find out that Russian spy got help from Loretta Lynch to get a visa problem solved, and you go, they're all connected. All these events that seem unrelated are connected, and then all of a sudden something will happen, and someone will wash up on a Miami beach dead. And you'll go, well, maybe that's unrelated, but it happened to occur the day that they're supposed to testify, and things like that. So the world is filled with Loretta Lynch is everywhere in the skanky world of geopolitics. Mueller is everywhere. Mueller was investigating Hillary's uranium deals, and now he's investigating Trump's collusion, and Manafort, who supposedly was working for Trump and got himself into trouble for colluding with the Russians, which I don't believe, probably. But he before he worked for Trump, he worked for Hillary, and God, it's just so promiscuously corrupt out there. So yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess. And with this kind of corruption, society doesn't do well, right? The free market doesn't do well when people lose faith in the basic tenets of the system. That'd be my big concern.
Well, absolutely. Both the appearance and the fact of impartial law is important, right? So we have, I think, neither at this particular point in time, because we see people getting away with clear felonies. Come on. Wells Fargo created how many hundreds of thousands of fake bank accounts and then fraudulently wired money from one to the other and stole from people? If I opened up a bank account in your name, I would be facing felony charges.
3.5 million.
3.5 million. And they're like, oh no, the CEO, he totally got punished. He had to leave his position with $65 million. That's
it goes
rough.
Back more years than we first thought too. It's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, that's a flat out felony. So if banks can commit felonies constantly, but you or I can get absolutely hauled before a magistrate for going 20 over in our cars, it just doesn't. That's corrosive over time. Of course, it absolutely is corrosive.
And the beginning of the corrosion was the Occupy Wall Street movement. It was really the first sort of social movement that looked like it was in response to disgust with the system. And of course they were able to stem it, but the idea of Occupy Wall Street has not gone away, right? The idea of it has not. Well, getting mad is real.
Yeah, and John F. Kennedy said that if you make peaceful revolution impossible, you assure violent revolution is inevitable. And so Occupy Wall Street was fairly peaceful, got squashed. I went to one of the first demonstrations within 2 weeks of Zuccotti Park, down there in Manhattan. I was there and I was checking it out, and it's a bunch of hippies and college students. It was a mishmash, poorly organized in terms of a central message, and it was ringed with the latest hardware, ringed with every possible thing that I'd been reading about, from the acoustic crowd control devices to funny little face recognition cameras on stalks. It was amazing, the tools of the state that came out to sort of suppress and really hold that in check. And so what do we have now? Now we have Antifa, right? And I think this only goes further and further because the disgust is growing, because it's a deeply unfair system. We're monkeys, we're primates at the bottom of it all, and since we're social creatures, fairness is an important concept. And I think that's one of the main themes that was coming out, particularly in part 2. I'm looking at this and I'm like, how is this not just seen as grotesquely unfair in a way that's deeply uncaring? And the healthcare insurance premiums are just sort of like one fractal representation of that for me. But that's what I think that, for the theme going forward. When I read your comprehensive piece, I say that social tensions are only going to increase. That feels like an easy prediction to make. And it's because the powers that be are so hopelessly out of touch. I think Peggy Noonan categorized it well, calling it the protected class. The people who pass the laws aren't the ones who suffer under them, and all of that. So that's really, I think it is a tale of two worlds, and increasingly, I think that's what's going to come forward. I'm wondering, what are you seeing looking forward after this summary? What's next, do you think?
I don't know. Actually, it's funny. When I write this thing, I never quite know what the conclusion's going to be.
Yeah.
The conclusion I drew this year that I got to over time, what I was stunned by is the anger out of what we'll call the progressive left. And I view the election of Trump over Hillary as a phase change. And so I captured it in a pair of tweets from a woman who I haven't a clue who she is, but the first tweet was right before the election. The whole essence of the tweet is, we have to heal and come together and solve problems and blah, blah, blah. I'm saying kumbaya, right? Mm-hmm. The second tweet was obviously right after the election. And the F-bombs and the epithets and the anger and the white supremacist claims and stuff. And then she finishes by saying good night and signs off. And I'm going, that's the same woman. And I titled it, What a Difference a Day Makes. But what is stunning to me is my image of the progressive left is that they're heavy on idealism and light on realism. And I would say that the right tends to be the opposite, right? That's kind of been our division of labor for many, many years. This year, the progressive left showed themselves to be the most bigoted, racist bunch of clowns I've ever seen. The stuff they were willing to say. And it was because they decided that Trump being elected, and I think even more importantly, Hillary not being elected, was just so intolerable that doing anything, saying anything is okay. And I got to tell you, I've never seen such hateful speech coming out of the mouths of people who call themselves liberals. And so it's pushed me to the right, and it's pushed me where I finished the thing with a write-up by a person, I don't know the source, in which the person says, you guys seem a little upset that you lost the election. Let me explain something to you. And he goes through this long list. He says, you took away our religion. You've taken away our schools. You've taken away our freedom of speech. And it goes through about 25 things. And he says, you created us and we beat you. We beat you not with bullets. We beat you at the ballot box. So a lot of people are talking about, impeaching Trump. Now, I have this profound sense that they can't do that. And the reason they can't do it is because half the country, whether they like him now or not, will say, no, we elected him and you don't get to just remove him because of your little tantrums. And so there's this poster, which I was going to put in it, but it's a little too militant. And I actually tweeted it this morning. And it's a picture of a bunch of people at a shooting range. And to me, it's really symbolic. And it's like men and women. And it says we have approximately 300 million legal guns. We have maybe 1 trillion rounds of ammunition. And then the final line was, if we were the problem, you would know it. And the problem I see is that if the progressive left thinks they can just extract an elected president because they're tantrums, because they don't like it, they don't like what he does, half the country, we're going to see what the other half can do in a rage. And so I don't think we can just remove him. I think the election is over, and it is time to heal. And I think that Trump has got a lot of flaws, and I think that a lot of flaws are induced by people opposing him in the most vile ways imaginable. And we'll never find out what he could have done, but we sure as heck will find out what's going to happen if they try to remove him, if they try to extract him. That's going to be an ugly moment.
It is. I get the sense that we're operating sort of at the collective level out of real brainstem sort of territory right now. And I too have discovered the fairly emotional and in many cases morally incoherent sort of eruptions that have been going on around now. And my model for that comes from they did a series of studies in the 40s and 50s and 60s where they would take a rat and put it in a cage and give it no escape. It's just in a bear cage and a grid floor, and they would shock it, and pretty unpleasantly. And that one rat would sort of figure out how to tolerate that shock, be miserable, but it'd be, figure it out. The problem came in when you'd put the second rat in the cage, and now they're both getting shocked, and they don't have any understanding of where the shocks are coming from, but now they have somebody to point it at. They're like, oh, it's you, and they fight. It's called shock-induced aggression. You can Google it. It's pretty common. It's very well studied. And so the point of this is that when people don't know where they're getting shocked from, it's very natural and it's for them to want to blame somebody. And it's very easy for the powers that be and the media, for whomever, to sort of begin pointing them in the wrong direction. And this is why, again, I want to get back to the subtext of a racket. It feels to me like while people are busy, pointing fingers at each other and really venting some probably pretty righteously sourced emotion, but misplaced in terms of where it's coming from. And my metaphor for this, the place that captured it was there were a series of protests in Berkeley where this really started to blow over. And you had Antifa on the left, people on the right, and they were fighting each other. And I found it ironic because Berkeley's where Janet Yellen teaches. That's the source of the shocks. That's the headwaters. Like, you want to know where 80% of our shocks are coming from. It's from a deeply unfair system that prints money and hands it to some people and pretends like that's legitimate. And what's actually happening is they're sucking economic oxygen and our future from everybody else and giving it to a very small number of people. That's unfair. Both those parties should have been aligned in fighting Yellen and what she's done to this country and what the central bankers are doing rather than each other. It's a hypothesis of mine.
Well, there's a video. I couldn't find it. I would have posted it. I somehow lost it in the noise of 500 pages of links. What a shock. A bunch of guys from Black Lives Matter going to essentially what we'll call a white nationalist rally. But I want to use the most non-pejorative component. It is certainly a bunch of white guys, and they were certainly irate that they were being treated poorly for being white guys now. They're being villainized, right? And a bunch of Black Lives Matter guys show up, and the leader, the guy who had the mic said, because we support, freedom of speech, we're going to give these guys 2 minutes at the microphone. And the black leader stands up there and he starts talking, and you can hear some angst in the audience. And then he starts saying, we support this and we support this. And pretty soon, everybody's cheering because this one black leader was able to say, we all support the same damn thing. And we're not in opposition like you guys think we are. And we don't oppose the cops. We oppose bad cops. Mm-hmm. And we want rights and we want freedoms and we want our kids to be educated. And at the end, it was just a big group hug, and it was tear-jerkingly heartwarming to watch this guy rally a decidedly polarized group into one unified force. There was some uneasiness, of course, but what a great story that was. And it can be done, but right now I think the game in Washington is to keep us fighting. In fact, you probably don't want to go there, but my final section is on the Vegas shooting. And the final question that I don't get to an answer is why? Why did the Vegas shooting occur? But one of the possibilities is to keep us fighting.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, there's a lot unexplained about that. And it's funny how it just sort of, evaporated. It happened and it's gone. So when things go down the memory hole, I always get suspicious. I follow both what is said and what is not said in the media, and
that's what just to pull things back out of the memory hole.
Yep, the media commits sins of omission and commission and all of that. So we didn't get a chance to really go through much of part 2. So maybe I think we'll have to pick this up again and do it at some other point because we're kind of at the limit that I know people will listen to look at a podcast time and say, I'll sign up for that. So so much we missed on that whole second part, which I think I'm going to make call an audible here and say we got to do it, but we'll do it in a second piece if you're up for that.
That's great. Always up for it.
All right. Well, Dave, thank you so much for your time again today and for writing the two giant part 2 year in summary. It's fantastic. People, you should listen to it here on this podcast and then go and read it. And because the data is there, and so have your coffee and maybe put some bourbon in it, because it's astonishing to see it all in one spot, and it's really inescapable in its conclusion. So that's we at Peak Prosperity, we love data, we love going by the facts, we love letting the dots connect and tell us that story, and this is just a fabulous collection of dots for anybody who wants to know what's going on in the world. So. Thank you for writing this, and we'll pick this up again soon, Dave.